Joining me today,
Yes,
Manuel, for a conversation on machine behavior as part of the series that you helped think up. And I look forward to being able to chat with you about the wide-ranging views and opinions that you have on machine behavior and AI in general and social media. So let's just get right to it.
Let's get to it.
Is it the case that the online world is eclipsing the real world in importance?
So it's a really good question. I think we have discussed this offline many times. I actually believe that that is the case. That we are trying to think of these two worlds as somehow the online world being this parasite growing into our real world, but we still kind of can look at it from the outside and somehow think whether we want more of it or less of it, and we can disconnect. And all this new wave coming from Silicon Valley of not let your children use phones or yourself put the phone out when you go hiking for 10 days or whatever. This would only work.
The best part of Facebook is not on Facebook, for example, right?
Exactly. I think Facebook itself is actually taking this on board with the advertising and stuff, right? But I think this only would work if somehow the offline world would be bigger than the online world, right? So if it's like, oh, well, I can decide to have dessert or not because I know that sugar is bad for me. But what if everything is dessert? What if everything is, the internet is online, right? Then it's a completely different calculation, right? Because if that is the case, even your offline decisions are actually really mediated by what the online world wants, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples. I think I was once going on a walk late at night in Melbourne, Australia, and I saw lots of people. I think this is something that we've all experienced, people who are in between behavioral science and anthropology or social science, political science, and you tend to be more curious about groups of people doing stuff. And I think I saw these young groups of people. It was kind of a simulation, so they were all in a bar and looking at their phones. That's fine. That's what you expect from millennials today. That's even from people who are older like us. But then at some point, when they were gonna do a selfie, it got very animated, and there was some kind of performance where they put their phone away, and one of them would take them out, and they would grab their beers, but they seem to be drinking their beers kind of too slowly.
Yeah.
So and I got this idea that somehow the online world has gotten so big and powerful that part of the logic of the online world is that you actually go offline and do stuff. Because that's really the only way to add novelty. It's like Facebook needs, or Twitter needs, the energy from the real world, because it's not that you can just do a snapshot, like a screenshot of your navigation and post it on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
That wouldn't fly for some reason that would be nice to understand. But it seems that there's this symbiosis, right, of, well, do some fun stuff, mostly the more spectacular the better, nature works better, seems antithetical to technology, but I think somehow it's part of the logic, right, that this is exactly what social media wants you to do.
The offline world has become currency for the online marketplace of kind of reputation and relationships. Is that the thesis?
That would be the thesis, and I think this is kind of what the Wachowski's movies, The Matrix, the trilogy, was mostly misunderstood, right? That the biggest critique of the movie was that why do machines need energy, electricity, right? Energy as electricity from humans. If machines are so advanced, can they just generate nuclear reactors or get it from the sun, right?
Yeah.
And I think the movie, which is amazing and highly metaphorical, right? I think what it's trying to say is that these machines are both very sophisticated. They can generate realities that are more interesting and more real than reality or as real. But also they're really dumb in the sense that we don't know how they came about. We don't know from which company they came from. Maybe they came from Twitter, or maybe there were some of the best algorithms from Twitter that somehow the only thing they know how to do is to get your attention, which is your energy, right? So it's like, okay, well, I was told to create a really compelling reality. And I can improve on this side, right? I can improve on the level of resolution of the virtual reality. I can improve in the deception,
Yeah.
but I cannot really improve on my own goals. So my goals are to get you. So I need humans, right? And
I just get you better and better and better until I've fully synthesized what it would be like to live in an alternative reality.
exactly, but it's not that I can actually get out of it, right? The machine is probably, I think this is, if you see the trilogy, you see it through the end. What you see is actually kind of this inherent limitation imposed on these machines to, and we know this in computer science from all these results of self-introspection of machines, right? There are some inherent limitations in what machines can do about themselves, right? So they can optimize something in ways that humans cannot see it coming, but something about them, and it's actually, if you look at Alan Turing's results and Carl Goddard's results and Rice's result more recently, you see that there's something about the introspection that it escapes them, right? So they're stuck in this getting our attention modes.
Yeah.
And I do think it's an important question, right? That if somehow the offline world has gotten smaller and we just didn't notice about it.
Yeah. I mean,
what do you think?
I mean, you know that I like to go hiking and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that's very interesting is that the number of people that have gone to visit the national parks in the U.S. has this really nice system where we have tons of public land and we've set aside some of it as national parks, and a lot of those are very accessible. And the number of people that are going to national parks has gone up dramatically over the last couple of decades. And that's great because more people are seeing the outside. But if you go to the national parks now, especially if you go to some of the prominent overlooks that are just beautiful, I mean, absolutely stunning, the most common thing that you see now are people with selfie sticks standing on the precipice, you know, smiling as much as they can to get the perfect shot of this amazing place that they probably had to spend a good amount of time and money to get to in order to do what with it.
And some of them are falling over. I think this.
Well, yeah, and yes, it's true. The rate of number of people who are dying taking pictures in national parks has increased rapidly as well.
I think there's a Wikipedia page with every single selfie death in the world.
That's morbid, but yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a Wikipedia page that tracks this, and I'm sure so many of them have to do with already a complex terrain like a national park.
But the interesting thing is that process fundamentally changes the norm. The up to 2 decades ago, the normal way that people would go to the national parks to experience them. One, there were fewer people, so it was kind of more just being out there with nature. And then 2, it was much more about being quiet and being in the place, as it was commodifying the place for then the currency of online digital communities. So that's just one area where I have seen this kind of impact of, it actually changes the nature of our reality to change what a place means, because now it's...
I was going to say, this idea of being quiet and escaping, it might be more modern. You probably know this better than me. It might be more modern in the context of hiking, adventure, nature, right? It might be more modern than we think. This idea of the distinction between the urban space as this matrix-like environment where it's full of CCTV cameras and mirrors and things, right? And this idea of, oh, the park is somehow the place where this does not happen for now.
Yeah.
And then, do you think that there's
Well, I think
something
it's
to it, right?
I mean, you know, up to a couple hundred years ago, we all lived in rural, for the most part, rural environments, heavily agricultural. So nature per se was not really something that was as readily available to anyone. However, you still had people like John Muir, who was kind of a pioneer explorer in the California Sierra, for example, and somebody who pushed a lot for the setting aside of these places, still 100 years ago having value and kind of really realizing the value of getting away and setting aside work and kind of normal life. Because even on a farm, even in a more rural setting, you still have a lot of stuff to do all the time. Actually, probably more work to do regularly. And so you're still busy and you're still not kind of connecting and getting away. And so, I don't know. I mean, it's not something, the idea of getting away is not something that came about only as a function of social media and the internet, but it is certainly something that seems to be in common discourse, at least now, at least the discourse that you and I read, much more prevalent and disconnecting from the internet. And disconnecting functionally should mean being quiet and things like that. I think it actually ends up being much more about producing content that can then be used. Like that's actually what it's called, right? It's called I'm like, I'm producing content. No, you're just living your life.
Exactly. So even the idea, because it can even creep into your life in kind of the absence of something. Like for instance, like I think I was living in Australia, and I think I got a text from a friend, and he said to me, "I'm not gonna be available until January 20 something." It's kind of they have a very long holidays around Christmas because it's kind of the summer and their holiday season at the same time, and they were announcing the absence of communication. So even if I were not to get this amazing selfie stick panoramic view, there is something of an absence that it's being catered to me, right? That the idea, even I sometimes say, I don't know if you've seen it in younger people, I see this in my brother and his friends, the idea of switching off your social media accounts is that bit like an act of protest.
Yeah, it's a response to those systems.
But they're always back, and it's always like, and they have, it's like, oh, ask me about my absence, right? So even things like nature or absence are really part of this very strategic logic of social media, right? And an exercise that I like, I think it was Christian Almenar, my friend from San Francisco, who first came up with this idea, right? He said, all right, imagine an election, right? An election in an important country like the US. And social media is already so powerful and so prevalent. And just imagine all these servers in so many locations running with these advanced algorithms, and they'll compete with each other, so they get better over time. And it's just like thousands of computing machines thinking, and they all think about it, they all compete along the same dimension, which is to get your attention, right? And then there's an election. Should you consider what these machines want as an outcome? So if these machines are the machines that we have today, which are about attention and clicks and time online and presence online, and an election comes, what is that they want? And this is going to start to get into media theory and political science, like this intersection that, does it really matter for these brains, if you want to call them that, these billions of brains, right, in terms of raw power? Does it really matter who wins? Or do they have a higher dimension of choices along which they actually have preferences? Like, well, I really want somebody to win who's going to give me more data and more time and is going to build me more servers.
Yeah, I mean, so to take that to its next logical extension, right? Who runs the algorithms are the big companies, and the companies design the algorithms because they want to make money off of the attention that is commodified. So the question boils down to, wouldn't it have been in Facebook's best interest to have Donald Trump elected rather than Hillary Clinton elected?
It's probably, and you're in our collaboration, you're normally the sane analytical person, but I think it should increasingly be a question that you kind of solve for that, in the sense that, all right, there is a crime committed, and I think detectives are amazing. You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes, but I think every detective is amazing to kind of do this inversion of, all right, if this happened, why would it have happened? Who would benefit? Let's look at this person, right? And I think in all this discussion about Russian bots or not Russian bots, or hackers in Russia or not hackers in Russia, or Facebook to blame, I think we should actually solve for machines. Let's say, all right, if there was an outcome that is perfectly aligned with getting more attention, getting more traffic, getting more memes, and that outcome happens to be very distinctive for other outcomes, right? Mm-hmm. It's very hard to argue that electing Hillary Clinton would have generated as many memes, as many retweets,
as much chaos.
Yeah,
right.
Hard to know, as you would say, right? Hard to know because other things can happen.
Sure.
And there can be resentment on the losers, and right. But it's hard to not imagine this outcome like Brexit, like as the one that fits the exact logic.
Things that are unpredictable and that break our expectations are ones that we pay generally more attention to, right?
It's almost like So it's almost like the perfect cliffhanger that it gets resolved satisfactorily. Like, what is the most unexpected outcome that at the same time you really want to know?
Yeah.
And if it happens, and it starts to happen consistently, because some people online have this theory that we are in hell, right?
Okay.
And
right.
hell is, we're in hell because all the outcomes that nobody wanted. But that can be the case, right? Because many people wanted them. Another explanation is that we are in a parallel universe where the most interesting things are happening, but we're not. We're still in this very same one, whether there are other universes or not, right?
Boring stuff is still happening all the time.
Exactly, right? So it's just that on the things that would increase the amount of time and energy spent in these environments, mostly the precise things are happening. I think we start to have to, coming back to machine behavior, right? What do they want? Not so much imply guilt by Facebook or Twitter, right? It's like, well, does even Facebook know what's going on, right? In the sense that these machines are doing so many things at the same time, right? So you say, oh, well, you're attracting more attention to this meme or this hate group or this campus protest. But I think we have to start to wonder, what would all this amount to do?
Yeah. I mean, so in political science, for example, there's a big strand of political science where we study institutions. And all that institutions are formalized sets of rules. But institutions shape incentives. They shape incentives of politicians, they shape incentives of voters, they shape incentives of corporations and things like that. And the rules that Facebook sets out or Twitter sets out or any of the large firms that have these algorithms set out for those algorithms are basically a set of institutions. You need to maximize the number of clicks that you get on this given amount of time, and that drives us a certain amount of revenue. Those in politics, institutions can have a set of rules that produce entirely unintended consequences because of the incentives that they set in motion. And so maybe that's kind of the way to think about this, right? You don't really want to give institutions agency. Mm-hmm. They don't really have, people make institutions, and the people who make those institutions have agency and intent and demand and all of that. In the same way, maybe you don't want to give the algorithms themselves the agency of having a desire to have a particular outcome. Agreed. But nonetheless, they have incentives in a kind of loose use of that term, and they produce outcomes. And so maybe there are a lot of parallels indeed, and as we think about machine behavior, to the way of studying institutions, and then things that we might be able to pull from that study to the study of the output of and the behavior of particular algorithms that are used in society. So did news feeds on Twitter and Facebook produce Donald Trump? Probably not.
You probably would say also that it's overdetermined, right? The question is not even
that's exactly
correctly posed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are many, many, many things that determine the result of a presidential election. On the margins, though, you can ask questions like, if you held everything else constant and you just flipped the design of the algorithms around this election, would that have changed the nature of the election? I think that's basically an impossible question to know the answer to at this point in time, but it's a very interesting one.
Right. There are so many things that you will have to look at, right? So you have to look at And I think our mentor, James Fowler, at some point set out to ask even the simplified version of this question, right? That what does an action online imply?
Yeah.
And these algorithms, again, these billions of computing cycles at the same, they are really doing so many that I think we kind of need to ask it's kind of these things that you need to start to ask philosophical questions first to even narrow down to empirical questions, right? And this is how we started, right? Has the online world somehow superseded the offline world? Because if this is the case, we can't poke at the online world and look for answers because it would be kind of foolish, right? It would be like, well, you're not outside of it, you're inside of it.
Yeah.
And then the question is, how do you get outside of it, right?
The way that we would put that is it's all an endogenous system. The system's all a function of other things in the system, which I think is a really important way to think about it, because it's not like social media is in any way orthogonal to the political process and actually going to the polls and voting, right? Both are functions of one another. The outcome of an election shapes the rules and regulations that social media companies face, and those social media companies, the algorithms that they employ, shape political preferences and political information that influences elections. It's a really tough problem.
I think in a way, maybe many years from now, right? So, of course, politics is very important because it has such important immediate outcomes, right? But maybe historians from the third millennium, right, would look at this time and they will look at maybe a more fundamental question, fight between
robo-historians.
Yeah, robo-historians. We get lucky and we managed to get them to look at these things, right? They might look at, remember, this is when the offline world lost. Mm-hmm. And one of the tactical mistakes that it made was to assume that it was still in control, right? Mm-hmm. We see this in science fiction movies all the time, right? Yeah. Even horror, which is my favorite line of science fiction, which is you often, in these movies, you always think that you are in control and then you're not.
Yeah.
And
it's terrifying when you find that out.
And then one question I have for you, right, this is an exercise of once you come to this kind of cosmic horror realization, to quote Lovecraft, right? The idea that there are some overlords that you don't really understand, right? It's not that they're evil or good, it's that you don't understand them. And Lovecraft writes all these novels, The Call of Cthulhu, where God is not good or bad, it's just a monster. Mm-hmm. And sometimes he wants sacrifice, sometimes he leaves you alone for months, but then it's kind of this, that's why every character in his novels goes mad, which is probably where we are all going, right? Is you don't know. And then the question that I would ask when I get here is, okay, so you have these systems, you have social media, you have Facebook, you have Twitter, and I think one of the reasons why it would be able to look at the offline world from above is that I think you can, this is probably even through military operations, you always have an advantage if you can observe your opponent from a vantage point, right? So
especially if they're unaware of your presence.
Exactly. So I know that the offline world is consumed by going out for a beer, dancing your ass off, probably edit that out, or going hiking. I know that I cannot give you a vantage point because it fits so nicely in the feed, right? So a video and sound and a photo does capture the moment, right? Yeah. And then the question I like to ask people is, can you imagine something that you do or that you might do that would not fit so well into these systems, right?
Yeah.
It's hard, and this is an effort that we've been trying to create these internet mysteries. So it would be mysteries, there will be problems that you can solve on the internet, but the solution would not be encapsulated in something that you could post on Facebook.
Right.
It would
get you outside of the system. So I mean that's it. So I in my personal life, try to somewhat minimize my social media use. I don't have a Facebook or Instagram or any of those kind of things.
Me neither.
Actually, before I came to MIT, we drove across the country because we were coming from San Diego, and that was in the build-up to the 2016 election when it was pretty kind of vitriolic on Facebook, and we spent a week kind of unintentionally not on Facebook, and we got to Boston and we were like, oh, that was really nice. So we just deleted it.
Is that how it happened?
Yeah. So it was actually not very intentional. It's just we
were driving.
We had no access to it.
I see.
And so, because neither of us had it on our phones or something like that, and then we realized that our lives were quite better for that week of not interacting with it.
You probably had a lot of very low-level adventure in this road trip, right?
Yeah, good amount. Yeah, I mean, it was, but the interesting thing is we didn't orient any of it for social media because it was kind of just like, we got a lot of stuff to worry about. We're moving, we got to take care of the cats. But and so it kind of maybe circumvented the normal system of like, take the really pretty picture in southern Utah. Because, you can't get out because it's too hot because the cats are in the back of the car. And
it would take you 2 months to get to Boston.
So the thing that I was going to ask actually is once you realize this system, once you kind of see, okay, maybe it is actually the case that the online world has subsumed the importance of the offline world, and the offline world is now in service of the online world. And your behaviors and the things that you do in life are in function of some algorithm somewhere that determine whether or not you're popular or not, something like that. And they start making decisions for you too, right? I think that's an important feature of the online world, is not just that it's helping determine our popularity and helping kind of give us the information that we see every day, but it's also solving questions for you that might have otherwise been in a previous world difficult to solve. How do I become popular in the world? Well, now you know that there's a set of algorithms that if you post the prettiest Instagram picture, you're more likely to get more likes for that Instagram picture, and it actually provides some constraining of the uncertainty.
Exactly. Even reduces sometimes what it does, I would say, is kind of to really reduce the options to 2 of them.
Yeah.
Or 3.
So let me take it to the limit and say, all right, now it's not just happening with respect to how you should spend your time in national parks. Now it's happening with respect to whom you should be friends with and whom you should go on a date with, whom you shouldn't go on a date with, which it kind of is. How comfortable are you, just personally, assigning greater and greater responsibility to algorithms to just take away the inconvenience and hardship associated with having to make tough, conflictual decisions in life, right? Like, who are we friends with? That's kind of tough. It's hard to figure out, oh man, I'm going to spend hundreds of hours of my life with this person, ex ante. How do I figure out whether that's a good decision or a bad decision? Wouldn't it be really nice if an algorithm could just tell you, hey, don't hang out with that person, hang out with this person instead, because you will have a much better positive outcome in life and you'll be happier? Would you do that? You had that choice. Let's actually draw that out. You had a choice, and you now have an algorithm that can tell you with pretty high accuracy better and less good friends that will be 10 years out, like how that friendship will have worked out for you. Would you use that algorithm and let it make your friendship decisions for you?
So I'm going to give you an indirect answer, starting with a joke. When I moved to the US, and people would ask me, what is the main difference between the way you make friends in America versus the way you make friends in Spain? Mm-hmm. I would say that in America, mostly people are friends with you because of who you are, mm-hmm. and in Spain, they would be despite who you are. So I think the problem of that question is, again, it comes from a very specific logic, which is there is a way of having a friendship that operates on a very particular dimension, which probably has to do with self-realization. Mm-hmm. It probably has to do with...
it presupposes a clear objective function.
Absolutely.
For that function. Yeah.
And coming back to your question is, I think social media systems are constantly asking us this question, starting with a binary, right? Are you following this person, or are you unfollowing this person, right? Mm-hmm. it's kind of interesting, right? Because
But they don't necessarily, they give you information on whether you should or not. But we've not yet gotten to the point where they're saying predictive things about the effects of following this person. They're saying like, hey, here's some people you should follow maybe, but not here's some people you should follow because it's going to increase your own status online, or you're going to be, the best man in this person's wedding or something like that.
even though they kind of are, right? So Jaral Lanier, who's I think maybe the contemporary philosopher of our time, I'm talking about these things, and super influential on my work and many, many other people probably, right? So he would say something like this, like, it's not that the algorithms are telling you who to be friends with, but they're certainly telling you who not to be friends with by showing you content that they know it would rally you up and offend you, right? So they are really kind of, if you look at them, are kind of tessellating, right? So the social world is this super multi-layered things, right? Like there are like 20 dimensions. One of them, and you're even discussing one, which is happiness, but there are many others, right? Which is, well, my mom told me...
Four more than 20.
Yeah, my mom told me to be friends with this person because she was friends with his mom or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that these algorithms might do is, first of all, they flatten them. Okay, we're going to operate in this one dimension. I'm going to flatten as much as I can, but then I also need to shape it. Because they know that shaping it increases polarization, that increases, right? It's this chain of events that would increase you, first of all, being disconnected from your immediate world, right? Because the first thing the online world is going to do to you, and this comes back to the concept of non-places, right? So Marc Audget, the French sociologist, wrote this book, and they describe places versus non-places. So places would be kind of the bell tower of a town, right? So it's a place that is, when you live in a town, it's always in your psyche because every hour is going to make a sound, and that gives some kind of context to your life, and it's always there and you can't escape it. But it also happens to be the place where you go to see the mayor make an announcement, and that happens to be the place where you celebrate the new year, and that'll be a place, right? It's always been there, or has been there for 60 years or 600, depending on the city, and it's full of history, right? So you don't really matter because you're just another person who is in this place. Yeah. Versus a known place would be an airport. In an airport, you have a destination, and you have to get through a number of hoops to get to that destination, but it's completely removed from history, and that's how it has to be, right? So it has to be completely functional, and you have to move around, and you have to have a coffee because you're sleepy, or you have to get some food, but it's all...
You're never just there to be there.
Yeah, and tomorrow it will look the same, but it will have nothing of you. And it's specifically designed. A highway would be this way, a gas station would be this way, right? And Marc Audget very cleverly said that the proliferation of known places was disrupting with our notions of time, right? That when you're in a known place, it's very hard for you to attach that moment to anything else in your life. So it's like time lost in a way that you can't really account for it. It doesn't make you feel good. It kind of makes you feel bad and lonely. And he would observe that whenever people go to known places, they tend to feel very lonely. And it's funny because places are because it's so robust, they tend to unite people. Right, so you go to see some sport. Sport is a great place, right? Real Madrid Stadium, and you're always sitting next to the guy who has the ticket, the yearly ticket. So eventually, you will talk about the match, right? Whereas in an airport, I don't know if you've noticed it yourself. You're kind of on defense. Like, oh, I want to talk to actually as few people as possible, and even the interactions are mostly with police enforcement, but they tend to be kind of adversarial, and they fill you with tension, right? Because nobody's supposed to be there, right? So you just have to get there. So known places would make people more anxious, uprooted, and then what probably the social media has done is to transform every place into a known place, right? So when you go to the bell tower and you take a selfie or you just texting, in many ways you are actually removing the benefits from that have accumulated over centuries on that place, right? You're actually removing them by not being there. So we have a proliferating expansion of known places, and the only place you could be is online.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of,
Right.
that fits the story about national parks as well, right?
Right? The idea of a national park would be that, I guess, and I'm not, as a European, we are afraid of nature.
We'll go sometime.
I hope so. We're really afraid of nature. But I think if you're not afraid of nature, which is not that scary if you know what you're doing, which you do very well, I think it's also a place where you connect with people, right? Have you seen that mountain? There's something interesting and beautiful or scary
You actually
there, right?
connect with the place, right? I wouldn't necessarily
Right.
know that it's a function of connecting with people. It's actually maybe more so about connecting with the place and perhaps the animals that are in the place and things like that.
Even me saying this, I think it's a trick that is playing on my mind. That the idea that you go to a place to connect with people is probably absurd in itself, right? The place is already interesting enough, right? So you will need to connect with people. It's the place that matters. So even that...
Maybe that's just a function of your exposure to social media.
Exactly.
The network.
Exactly. So the question would be, back to you, would be, can you imagine, so if this is the case, you need to kind of, now you're in high alert mode, and you need to say, all right, how do I know that I'm not being superseded by this online world? And the question I would say, okay, what can I do, both online and offline, that would not fit?
Is there anything?
I think so.
Can you still be a part of society as it exists today and be sure that your behaviors are not a functional product of the incentives that the others around you in your social network are facing as a function of the algorithms that are interacting with them online? How can you be sure of that?
You for sure cannot escape in this mode of the internet, but I think if you go back in time, there were actually two modes. If you go back to the beginning of the internet, it was actually very, very hiking style, right? So you could actually take a very nice hike on the internet. Mm-hmm. First of all, you always started from a bad place. So there were no search engines, so you kind of always started from a completely random place, where it was probably some kind of directory, and from then you start clicking. And I can tell you, and you can ask people who are older than me, in 5 clicks, you're in a really weird place. Every place is also, every online place is also very personal. So if you look at, there were not even blogs, there were some kind of personal pages. And what people would do, it was very kind of, very candid portrayals of themselves and weird things that they like. Mm-hmm. So you stumble upon this, which is pretty much like stumble upon beautiful lake that nobody has seen. It's like, oh, also you're alone there. You're looking at it alone. Time is of the matter, right? So it's expensive to be online, so you have to keep moving, but you're fascinated. So you save that into some kind of text file, and you keep moving, right? And there was a very mysterious internet I'm trying to document almost historiographically, right? That mm-hmm. The internet was a very scary place, but it was magical. And one of the things that I really like about it had nothing to do with the real world, right? So it was the place that was not the real world. And I believe that is still there, and we can talk if we have time about some of these internet mysteries that are kind of prehistorical cave paintings, right? So it's things that remain from the early days. But mostly, so it could have stayed there, and the internet would be this wild west of novelty and mystery and innovation and art. There were lots of art, lots of poetry online. It was a very creative, expansive universe, right? That probably was not monetizable or really much to do with it, except experience it. It was a very experiential internet. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's if you want to believe, it could have some of the remnants of a religion, of this this kind of ascendance into a different world that you didn't know, and faith, and then there was a different internet which was starting to creep up, which is probably Lycos, Yahoo, and all these extremely talented people came up with a way of kind of flattening it. It's like, okay, well, we're gonna have these algorithms are gonna crawl it, and then we're gonna have it actually in one place, which makes it automatically less mysterious, because when you actually search the internet on Google, you don't search you search a file in a computer, which already gives it less of a mystery aspect to it. And then that internet was the one that took on, which was the internet of, I never have to venture into things. It's kind of, you're gonna just wait for them to come to me. I think social media is just the latest iteration, which is, you don't even search.
Hyper customized.
Yeah, things just come to you, right? And for that you need to have an identity, which is probably why Mark Zuckerberg is worth billions of dollars, because he did crack the identity problem of online, and as such, you don't even need to search. We just know who you are, and because we know who you are, And I think this
we know who you are, perhaps even better than you do on some dimensions. Right?
I think this pre-search internet does not fit in the current internet well, and you can see all these weird things that we can discuss if you want. That they're.
So we talked about this, and I think it's a fascinating concept. And one of the things that we have sort of adjacent to that talked about is, all right, what would the world have been like if the internet of old, the original internet, or one of the versions, the iterations of the internet that actually was more about going out and searching and finding things, and perhaps even finding things that then helped to foster something new in your real life. What would how might the world be different today if that was how the internet went, as opposed to the way that it did go?
So I thought about it. I don't think I have a great answer, but this is what I think would have happened. So it was a more active internet. So, for instance, there were a lot of communities that were being formed. If you look at it, they normally would form around interests. So some people, for instance, there were many communities about the sky. People interested in cosmology and the stars and documenting them. And if you observe what they were doing, they were actually kind of building mini institutions around it.
Yeah.
They were they were all very ad hoc, but they were all very meaningful in the sense that they had the organization that would work to classify pictures from the sky. You had the same thing about, there were like a lot of internet poetry, and they started to have these kind of collections and editors and things like this. You can see a bit of this in Wikipedia. I consider Wikipedia a bit of pre-search.
The old
dinosaur is like a T-Rex still walking among us, but we don't see it as such. But Wikipedia is very searchy. So it's very pre-searchy, right? That you want something, you read it. It has links to other things that you can follow. Very quickly, you are learning something new. So Wikipedia is beautiful in that.
It's not customized for you.
Not at all, exactly. So what I think the internet would have looked, and coming back to Wikipedia, I think what would have happened is maybe some of the logic of civilizations, that there were some resources that you needed to go fetch in a way that would not be too exhausting or dangerous. And as such, you needed to kind of develop some kind of organization around it. My prediction, which is a weak prediction because it's not really based on modeling or careful experimentation, is that I think that more active internet would have developed pure online institutions that would have been separate from the offline ones. As such, it would have collided less. It would have less collision to them. But I think problems like the ones that you tackle, which are related to climate change and what to do with it, how to understand it, how to counterbalance it. I think maybe climate change was not a good problem for the real world. It was a problem that would be better tackled in a new mega online institution that somehow would be able to create its own. Because one of the problems, and please correct me, is that one of the problems of dealing with climate change is that it has to do with politics.
Of course.
And it seems that this is an unsurmountable challenge, right? That once you bring this down into the real world, it doesn't work. You somehow would have to circumvent the political world to do something about it, right?
Well, the other interesting thing about it is that it's basically the inverse of what a newsfeed algorithm is optimizing for, which is they want your short-term attention.
That's correct.
They want your immediate short-term attention about whatever is really happening right now in the present that is super sexy and juicy. And no matter how hard you try, the cataclysms that will occur 80 years from now are just not going to be as juicy as a Trump tweet today.
So
I mean, to put a point on that, like things are happening in the world today that are distant spatially from us that the median American just doesn't even know about, much less care about. How are they going to be convinced that 80 years down the road, when those bad things are happening in those spatially distant places, or to people that aren't even born yet, they should care about that? So the internet could have, you're saying, could have perhaps optimized on a different dimension, rather than focusing attention on immediate short-term things that have to be politically expedient and have to satisfy the set of societal institutions and the power players in that. Maybe they could have kind of like hacked basically those existing.
Coming back to your question, because you're actually pointing out something that is very profound. I ask you what does not fit well in social media. I think climate change might be it. Like, it doesn't lend itself very well to social media. And as such, it's probably discarded or tangentially used only at the conceptual level for conflict. So so if you look at somebody as a really evil creature, probably what does the following, like, okay, I can't do much with this. It's not that I'm against it. It's not that I believe or don't believe in it. It's, I can't get much attention out of this because it's not a beautiful photo, it's not impressive. I can't really put my finger of whether this was climate change or not. So it's like, I'm gonna discard it, but wait, there's something I can do with it. Those who are in favor of it don't like those who are, right? It's probably this evil logic of, I can't really do much with this content. It's just content that the one thing I can do is I can infer that these people and these people are gonna clash online, and I do like that.
So the underlying hypothesis there is that there might have been action on climate change if not for social media. That's the crux of the underlying hypothesis. That
if you went back at the way people were like cataloging stars, maybe that was the speed and the structure that you guys needed, right? That we all needed. This kind of ad hoc online institution that was the climate change institution that was completely removed, but was really big and structured around particular actions or funding or measurements. So this is my hypothesis, that it would actually have, this internet would have actually matured into a world in its own, not necessarily colliding with ours or smashing ours, a world in its own, and it would solve problems for which the online world is good for. Yeah. And it would have left problems for which institutions are good for, right?
The interesting thing is you don't even necessarily need to specify what the internet would have been in the counterfactual world. You could just say, hey, the fact that social media has so optimized for short-term attention and the institution it's created has, for example, hollowed out local journalism and the focus on longer form essays and real investigative journalism. And I think probably, this is a hypothesis, I don't have a lot of evidence for it, but has shortened somewhat our attention spans just collectively. Mm-hmm. And what you need to understand the threats of climate change really, and to let them sink in, is the opposite of a short attention span. So all you might need is not necessarily for the internet to be any particular thing, just to have not been optimized to garner our attention, our full attention to short-term issues. I mean, one thing I was curious about is basically, so you're an artist, or at least you
As a hobby.
you are very modest about your artwork, but you produce some very interesting artwork.
Very kind of you.
And you're also someone who has thought a lot about the ability of AI to be creative. And I say that with kind of scare quotes because it's maybe a little bit different than what it means for us to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
But in the framework of machine behavior, so we're evaluating output of machines, do you think there's any way for us to ever really kind of get a sense for whether or not our machines are more creative than humans? And does that even make sense to ask as a philosophical question?
So you will have to look at the history of art and from the beginning to contemporary art. And art has always it's been quite figurative, right? So whether you got sculpture or architecture or paintings, it was always trying to represent reality. It's not that it wasn't trying to mimic reality, but it was trying to condense the symbolic elements of reality as accurately as possible, right? And Velázquez is considered, together with Rembrandt, one of the greatest painters, if not the greatest. It's about precision, right? He's a precision painter. He wants to show you what it is to be in the kingdoms, in the king's castle on a boring afternoon when everyone is bored, and right, it has this journalistic, representational, figurative aspect, right? And this goes through to the 20th century, where Marcel Duchamp, the great French cubist, shatters this and say, listen, we have photography, we have video, we have all these techniques to transfer reality into material. We need to stop doing that as artists because that is done. Of course, some people might like it and appreciate it, but if you want to be a vanguard artist, you can't do that. So now it's going to be about decontextualizing objects that exist into the world. So you have the toilet sent to the Louvre, right? Mm-hmm. And you have, so the 20th century it has to do with emphasizing things that we consume every day into what they mean symbolically for us, kind of disconnecting the reality of them from the symbolic. It's kind of the opposite. So AI, if it's gonna follow the creative trajectory, it needs to be contemporary art, right? So AI. So whenever I see that AI has painted something very well, I'm quite unimpressed because 100 years ago we moved on from that, right? So I don't think that's impressive. What would be great, the test for me, my Turing test for AI creativity would be if AI was able to do something like what Duchamp did, Marcel Duchamp, right? If AI was able to select a toilet to submit to the MoMA, whatever the MoMA is today, whatever the toilet is today, right? If somehow the AI was able to say, hey, these objects that you're consuming every day, whether it's a browsing strategy, I want you to look at them because they mean a lot. It's a very long-winded answer to say that we can look for AI to do well art that was done before the 20th century. I think this is where we're stuck. I myself have been stuck in coming up with AI that writes well or paints well. I think we know that AI has surpassed that when it's able to create conceptual art and submit it to us, and we know there is something there, but it's going to take us 5 years to understand what. That would be my test for the creativity in AI.
All right, fascinating. Manuel, thank you for
pleasure
joining me today in the very fascinating questions, and you're just a really interesting dude, man.
My pleasure, Nick.
All right.